People see what they see, they hear what they hear, and there is nothing you can do about it. Now, this notion alone explains more failed conversations than most communication courses ever will. And that is not me being cynical, it's me being honest, frankly, about, well, the human nervous system. We like to believe communication is a skill you can master, like juggling or driving a car. You can learn the rules, practice a bit, and voila, everyone starts getting along. However, human beings are not cars, and communication isn't a road. It's a collision, rather, between two inner worlds that neither of us fully understands. You don't even understand your own, and every time you open your mouth, you're stepping into that collision again. Well, here's the part we don't like to admit. When you speak, you lose control. The moment the words leave your mouth, they no longer belong to you. They belong to the person receiving them, with their experiences, their insecurities, their prejudice, their mood that day, and their private history with people who sound, well, a bit like you. You can be crystal clear and still land like a foghorn. You can be gentle and still sound patronizing. You can say something meant as a compliment and watch it land like an insult. It happens in marriages, it happens in boardrooms, in WhatsApp threads, and especially in the modern world where we do, well, half our communicating through, well, glowing rectangles with no tone, no face, and no context. No, nothing, sometimes. I mean, you knew exactly what you meant. You heard the sentence in your own head. You felt it was reasonable, maybe even kind. You maybe even rehearsed it. You walked into that conversation with the confident belief that meaning travels intact from your brain to their brain, like you're sending a package, and if it's wrapped properly, it arrives properly. But what survives after it has passed through another person's internal filter in here is something else entirely. Not because they are stupid, not because they are idiots, not because you are bad, but because that's the nature of perception. We don't receive reality, we construct it more. And that gap between intention and impact is where most human conflict lives. In this video, I will show you the main reason behind 90% of every misunderstanding you ever been in. Not 100% because that would be a lie, and most importantly, I'll show you my best methods for avoiding these sometimes painful experiences. And if you like this video, which I hope you do, please share it with your friends, the ones you think could have use of these insights. So stay tuned and we will fix this together. Now, if you've ever had a conversation where you walked away thinking, how on earth did they get that from what I said? Then you felt this weird gap. If you ever try to explain yourself and watch the other person become more offended with every clarification, you felt it. If you ever said, that's not what I meant, and the other person said, yes, but that's what it sounded like, then congratulations. You have discovered that communication isn't about what you meant. It's about what they heard. Now, most people don't want to hear that. It feels unfair, and maybe it is. It feels like you're being held responsible for someone else's interpretation. It feels like the rules are rigged, and I guess in a sense they are. Because the world doesn't reward intention, it rewards results. Yep, this place is an unfair one. I mean, think about it. If you step on someone's foot by accident, their foot still hurts. If you bump into someone's car at the parking lot, there will be a dent, even if you didn't mean it. Now, if you insult someone unintentionally, they still feel insulted. You can stand there with your clean conscience and your innocent face and your perfectly reasonable explanation, and it will not undo the impact. Sometimes it even makes it worse, frankly, because now you're not only hurting them, you're also arguing that they shouldn't be hurt. Well, that's a lovely way to lose a friend and gain a lesson, I guess. So the starting point here is this. Your words do not arrive in another person's mind the way they left yours. They arrive distorted, not always, not dramatically, not in every conversation, but often enough that it shapes your entire life, really. It shapes your relationships, it shapes your leadership, it shapes your friendships, it shapes your conflicts, it shapes your reputation, actually. It shapes your sense of being understood. And here's the really uncomfortable part. You cannot fix this by becoming more yourself. That's the current fashionable advice, right? I mean, be authentic. Say what you feel. Speak the truth. Don't overthink. Don't filter yourself. Just be you. It sounds courageous, it sounds modern, it also creates chaos when applied without intelligence. Because just be yourself is indeed wonderful advice if you are alone in the room. It is also wonderful advice if everyone around you is exactly like you. In every other situation, it's not a philosophy, it's a shortcut, or even worse, it could be a dead end. We all met people who pride themselves on honesty, but seems to cause a trail of destruction. They speak bluntly, they offend people left and right, and they say then, well, that's just how I am, you know. Well, probably not. Probably not. That's not how they are. That's how they choose to behave. And behavior can be adjusted. The real question is whether these people could be bothered. Maybe that person is a jerk. Maybe it's not. It's just low on self-awareness, I guess. Once you accept that the recipient is in the driver's seat, you suddenly have a choice. You can either keep communicating as if meaning is something you own, and then spend the rest of your life frustrated that other people don't get it, what it is, what do they really know. Or you can start communicating in a way that respects reality. That meaning is co-created. That your job is not to express yourself, your job is actually to be understood. And yes, I know how that sounds. It sounds like you're shrinking, like you're bending, maybe like you're giving up. Maybe you're not being you anymore. But adapting communication isn't about becoming smaller. No, it's about becoming more effective. It's a difference between insisting that your car should run on whatever fuel you happen to like and learning what fuel actually makes the engine work. You can scream at the engine all day, it will not be impressed. Just the way it is. Now, let me make this painfully relatable, because theory is cheap, and most people watching this have already consumed enough insight to last a lifetime. They don't need more insight. What they need is, I think, a mirror. Think about the last time you sent a message that you thought was neutral, short, efficient, and the other person responded as if you just slapped them. I mean, you meant, can you send it today? And they heard, you're slow and unreliable. You meant, we need to talk. And they heard, oh, I'm in trouble, deep trouble. You meant, interesting. They heard, oh, you're not impressed at all. You meant, fine. They heard, fine, as in war has been declared. And then you get the modern classic moment, one that happens in kitchens and offices and comment sections, where you find yourself defending your own intention. No, you misunderstood me. Which actually is hilarious if you think about it, because what you're really saying is your interpretation of my words is deeply incorrect. Let me tell you what you should have heard. Good luck with that. The point here is not to say that people are fragile. The point is that people are patterned. We all have a behavioral operating system, and we interpret signals in a particular way. Some people are wired to hear threat quickly. Some people are wired to hear disrespect quickly. Some people are wired to hear rejection quickly. And some people are wired to hear incompetence very quickly. And it's the same sentence, different reaction, different story. Communication isn't what you say. It's what happens in the other person, inside them. Most communication advice is built on an assumption that is almost childlike. If you just use the right technique, people will behave around you. But people don't behave because of techniques. They behave because of what they feel. And what they feel is shaped by what they think you mean. And what they think you mean is shaped by their own filters, their own stories, their own scars, preferences, their own worldview, what happened earlier in their lives, last week, last year, 2 decades ago. What do you know? What do I know? Nobody knows. It is what it is. I want you to keep one question alive in the back of your mind. It's not a philosophical question, it's a practical one. How many of your conflicts are not caused by what you said, but rather by what the other person heard? And here's a follow-up question, which is the one most people avoid. How often do you make that worse by insisting that your intention should have mattered more than their experience? I mean, if you're honest, you realize something. Most people don't lose relationships because they are evil. No, they lose them because they keep repeating the same style, the same gear, the same tone. Even if it doesn't work, then they blame the other person for being too sensitive or being difficult or just not getting it. This isn't about being nicer, it's about being wiser. It's about learning to stop throwing the same message at different minds and expecting identical results. And when you speak, Your control slips away, it lands in someone else. They interpret, they react, and then you have a choice. You can fight their interpretation or you can learn to anticipate it. I'm going to move into the part now that most people hate because it removes their comforting excuses. But before we do, let's make a small agreement, just a fair one, a tiny one. For the next half hour or so, I'm not asking you to become a saint. No, I'm not asking you to be endlessly patient. I'm not asking you to treat everyone like a delicate flower. No, I'm asking you to do something far more annoying, to become responsible for your effect on people. The world is full of people with good intentions. The world is not short on good intentions. What it's short on is people who can get through to each other. And that's what this is about. So pay attention. This is important. The myth of intention. Why I meant well doesn't help, really. It's a bit depressing to realize how little control you actually have over what another person understands. I mean, most of us grow up with a quiet but powerful assumption that meaning lives in what we intend. That if we choose our words carefully enough, if we explain ourselves clearly enough, then our message should arrive more or less intact. This assumption feels reasonable. Yes, it does. It is also wrong often enough to cause some serious damage. Intention feels central because it is the only part of communication we can fully access. You know what you meant. I mean, you know what you were trying to do and trying to say. You know whether you wanted to help, correct, encourage, or protect. From the inside, your motives felt obvious, almost self-evident. From the outside, they are, well, invisible sometimes. And this is where the myth begins. We judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their behavior. Maybe you've heard that one before. We judge ourselves by our intentions. We know what we're thinking, and others by their behaviors, their actions. That asymmetry alone explains a remarkable amount of conflict. You look at your own actions and you see the good reasons behind them. You look at someone else's actions and only see the outcome. When the two don't align, resentment grows quietly in both of you, really. I mean, when communication fails, most people respond by doubling down on explanation. They repeat themselves, they add context, they emphasize what they really meant. And very often this makes things worse, frankly. Not because the explanation is wrong, there's nothing wrong there, but because the emotional moment has already passed. The listener is no longer evaluating information, they are defending an experience. Once someone feels criticized, dismissed, pressured, or belittled, logic loses its privileged position completely. At that point, every additional word is filtered through a question that rarely gets spoken aloud. Why are you talking to me like this? This is where many well-intentioned people get completely stuck. They believe that clarity should override emotion. Maybe it should, but it doesn't. That if they can just phrase it correctly, the other person will see the reason. But communication is not like that. It's not mathematics. It's more like biology, frankly. Nervous systems react before intellect intervenes. By the time you are explaining yourself, the reaction has already happened. This is why the sentence, "That's not what I meant," is so ineffective. It isn't wrong, it's simply irrelevant to the other person's experience. You're offering an internal explanation for an external effect. Those two things live in different psychological compartments completely. I mean, consider how often conflict escalates, not because of what was said, but because of the defense of what was said. One person reacts, the other person explains. The first person feels unheard, the second person feels misunderstood. Both are now certain that the problem lies with the other one. Not me, you. You are the problem. From there, well, communication becomes a courtroom instead of a conversation. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Meaning is not owned by the speaker. It is negotiated and often poorly. The listener doesn't receive your words as neutral data. They receive them as signals about intent, status, safety, respect, threat maybe. Signals are interpreted as a speed and depth you cannot consciously control. This doesn't mean people are irrational. It means they are human. Sometimes that's the same thing. We are wired to scan for danger long before we scan for nuance. I mean, tone, timing, facial expressions, posture, and history all shape how a message is received. A sentence that feels harmless in one relationship can feel loaded in another one. A question that feels efficient to one person can feel like an interrogation to someone else. The words may be identical, the meaning is not. Most people are vaguely aware of this, but they underestimate its importance. They treat miscommunication as the exception, like some occasional glitch. In reality, it's a default condition, I would say. Clear understanding isn't the norm, it's the achievement rather. This is where frustration creeps in, because if intention is not enough, then what is? Are we supposed to constantly tiptoe? To endlessly monitor how others might feel? To carry the emotional responsibility for every possible interpretation? No. I call BS on all of that, but we are accepted to grow up. Being an effective communicator is not about preventing all misunderstandings. No, it's probably hard to, if not impossible. It's about reducing unnecessary ones. It's about recognizing patterns in yourself and in others and adjusting accordingly. It's about accepting that your preferred way of speaking is not universally received as neutral or even reasonable. This is where people often protest. But I shouldn't have to adapt all the time. Well, maybe not. They're right in theory. In practice, refusing to adapt simply transfers the cost to your relationships. You still pay, you just pay later, in the form of tension, distance, and lost trust. Sometimes even worse than that. Now, the irony here is that most people who insist on being understood exactly as they intend also complain that others don't listen. What they usually mean is others don't interpret me the way I want them to. That is not a listening problem, it's a translation problem. And translation requires some effort. There's another layer to this myth that is worth addressing, I would say, because it hides between moral language. We often confuse good intentions with good behaviors. We assume that because we did not mean harm, harm should not be felt. Again, if I accidentally step on your foot, it should actually not hurt at all, really. But impact happens whether you approve of it or not. You can be kind and still be clumsy. You can be helpful, still be pushy. You can be honest and still be destructive. None of these things make you a bad person. They do, however, make you responsible, I would say. Responsibility in communication, very important. But it doesn't mean blame. No, it means awareness. It means noticing that certain ways of speaking reliably produce certain reactions, and that continuing to use them while complaining about the result is not authenticity. It is stubbornness, frankly. I mean, the idea of being yourself needs to be handled with care. You're not a single fixed thing. You're a collection of behaviors, tendencies, habits, reflexes. Some of them serve you well, sure. Some of them do not serve you very well at all, really. I mean, treating all of them as sacred is not self-respect. It is self-neglect. If you insist that your intention should outweigh another person's experience, you're asking for a privilege that doesn't exist in human interaction. You're asking reality to bend to your inner narrative, but reality rarely complies. Think about it. Once this is understood, something important shifts. Communication stops being a moral exercise, who's right, who's wrong, all of that, and becomes a practical one. What works, what doesn't work, with whom and under what circumstances. It's not about being nicer, it is about becoming accurate. And accuracy requires that we stop pretending that intention is the central force in communication. It isn't. Interpretation is. That insight alone already changes how you listen, how you speak, how you react. But it also raises a new unavoidable question. If intention is not a deciding factor, if people reliably interpret the same message very differently, then what exactly shapes those interpretations? That's where we go next. You see, once the myth of intention begins to crack, a second resistance usually appears. This one is quieter, but just as stubborn. It sounds something like this. So now I'm supposed to adjust myself for everyone else. Great. At first glance, that sounds like a reasonable objection. After all, adapting your communication requires some effort. It demands attention. It forces you to pause. Sometimes restrain impulses that feel natural, justified. And in a culture that celebrates, self-expression and personal authenticity, adaptation is often mistaken for submission. But no, adaptation is not about erasing yourself. It is about choosing long-term effectiveness over short-term comfort. Most people confuse adaptation with being fake. They imagine it means putting on masks, manipulating others, or constantly second-guessing themselves. In reality, adaptation is far more mundane and far more mature. It's the simple recognition that different people need different things in order to understand, to engage and cooperate. You already do this more often than you realize. You don't speak to a child the same way you speak to a colleague. No. You don't speak to a really close friend the same way you speak to a judge or a police officer or a stranger in a crisis. You instinctively adjust your tone, your pace, your vocabulary, your level of detail. You do things without feeling fake. Why? You do it because it makes sense. So the question isn't whether you should adapt. You already do, right? The real question is where you refuse to adapt and why. Very often the refusal is rooted in identity. This is just how I am. I am a very direct person. I value honesty. I don't like sugarcoating. Well, neither do I. But if I have to be smarter than that sometimes, maybe you need to be smarter than that. We all do. I mean, none of these statements are wrong, but none of them are complete either. They describe preferences, not obligations. They describe habits, not destiny, let's say. When people say, this is just how I am, what they often mean is, this is the behavior I am most comfortable with. Comfort, however, is not the same thing as competence. Being comfortable in one gear doesn't make it suitable for every terrain. This is where communication quietly becomes a matter of power. Not dominance, but influence. If you refuse to adapt, you're effectively asking everyone else to do the adapting for you. You're placing the burden of interpretation, of tolerance, of adjustment on the other person, while reserving the right to remain unchanged. That may feel principled. It's usually useless. Effective communicators don't ask, how can I stay exactly the same in every situation? No, they ask, what does this situation require? Well, that shift alone changes everything, because once you start paying attention to what others need in order to function well, communication stops becoming a battle of wills. Instead, it becomes more of a coordination issue, and coordination is learnable. You can learn that. Of course you can. One of the reasons this is so difficult is that we tend to assume our own style is neutral. We rarely experience ourselves as aggressive or dismissive, controlling, evasive, or whatever. Those ugly traits are for other people. No, bad people. We experience ourselves as normal, reasonable, clear. Any negative reaction from others therefore feels like an overreaction. I'm good. But neutrality is an illusion. Every communication style has a cost. Directness can feel horribly brutal. Caution can feel like weakness. Enthusiasm can feel utterly chaotic. Precision can feel chillingly cold. What feels natural to you may feel threatening, exhausting, or confusing to someone else. This doesn't mean other people are fragile. It means they are different. Okay? Different. Difference is not a moral problem. The mistake many people make is to treat adaptation as some kind of surrendering, as if adjusting how you speak somehow diminishes your authority or dilutes your truth. In reality, the opposite is often true. The more precisely you adapt, the more authority you gain, because your message actually lands where it should. Think of it this way. If your goal is to be understood, then insisting on one rigid style is not integrity, it's nothing but sabotage. It's not about agreeing with everyone. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's not about being endlessly accommodating. It's about choosing how you communicate so that the substance of what you say has a chance to be heard. There's a deeper reason why adaptation feels threatening to many people. It exposes something uncomfortable, that our way of functioning isn't universal, that what feels obvious to us is not obvious to others. And once you accept this, a quiet humility enters the scene. Not the performative one, but the practical one, Stop assuming that resistance means stupidity or ill will. You start considering the possibility that your message is simply mismatched to the person in front of you. It's where many conflicts could end, really, if people were willing to pause here and think. Instead, what often happens is that people double down. They speak more forcefully. They clarify more aggressively. They become increasingly frustrated. The other person still doesn't get it. What they are really experiencing is not misunderstanding, but misalignment. Alignment requires adjustments. And adjustments, crucially, is not symmetrical. You do not adapt the same way to everyone, sure. You understand that. You adapt differently depending on who you are dealing with, what matters to them, and what they are trying to protect. That requires observation, it requires curiosity, it requires that you stop assuming your own perspective is the default setting here. It's also where the idea of majority becomes important. Whatever your behavioral style is, it is statistically very unlikely to match most of the people around you, okay? That means that if you insist on communicating exclusively on your own terms, you will spend much of your life feeling misunderstood and much of your energy blaming others for it. So flexibility then is not about being nice, it's about being realistic, really. Good communicators, I met a lot of them. They are not those who speak beautifully. They are not those who move between styles without losing themselves. They know when to slow down and when to speed up, when to be brief, when to go deeper, when to soften, when to sharpen. Not because they are indecisive, but because they are attentive. They are flexible. They understand something that is both, well, simple and difficult to accept. Your message is only as strong as the environment in which it is received. Create safety and people will listen. Trigger defensiveness and nothing else matters. This is why adaptation is not a personality trait, it's a competence, it's a skill. And like all skills, it improves with awareness, with feedback, and obviously with, yes, practice. Awareness alone is not enough though. To adapt intelligently, you need a framework, not to label people permanently, but to recognize patterns reliably. To understand why certain approaches work beautifully with some people and fail spectacularly with others. Without this understanding, adaptation becomes guesswork. With that understanding, adaptation becomes strategy, becomes efficient. And this brings us to the next problem, one that almost everyone stumbles over sooner or later. Our obsession with labels and our simultaneous fear of them. At this stage, many people reach for a familiar refuge. This is just how I am. Okay, again, it sounds honest, it sounds self-aware. It sounds like confidence, and in a certain context, yes, it sounds healthy, but most of the time it functions as something else entirely. It's a full stop where reflection should have continued. There are exactly two situations in which you can behave entirely as you please. The first one is when you are alone in a room. In that situation, your behavior has no social consequences. You can speak out loud to yourself, you can stay silent for hours, pace back and forth, overthink, underthink, swear, sing, stare at the ceiling wondering why some people collect garden gnomes. None of this matters, none of it is affected, freedom is complete. The other situation is when everyone else in the room is exactly like you. They think like you, they react like you, they value the same things like you, they are energized by the same pace, the same level of detail, the same emotional temperature. In that situation, you can safely treat others exactly as you would like to be treated yourself. Your mother's advice works beautifully here. You don't need to just translate, restrain yourself because no translation is required. Outside of those two situations, insisting on this is just how I am is not authenticity. It is comfort disguised as identity. You can behave exactly as you want. No one is stopping you. There is no law against bluntness or silence, intensity or emotional distance, excessive enthusiasm. Freedom of behavior exists, yes it does, but freedom does not guarantee effectiveness. Now this is where many people quietly confuse the two. If your goal is simply to express yourself, then by all means speak as you please. Just do it. But if your goal is to be understood, if your goal is to be trusted, respected, if your goal is to be followed, adaptation is the price of admission. That is not a moral judgment, it's a practical one. The phrase, this is just how I am, often appears precisely when adaptation feels inconvenient. When slowing down feels tedious, when softening your tone feels unnatural, when explaining your reasoning feels unnecessary, when listening feels like work. At that moment, identity becomes a shield. But behavior isn't identity. You are not your first reaction. You are not your favorite habit, right? You are not the behavior that feels most natural when you are tired, stressed, or maybe impatient. Those are tendencies, but they are not truths. The irony is that most people who cling most fiercely to this is just how I am are often the same people who expect others to be flexible, to be understanding, to be accommodating. They want to be accepted as they are, while quietly hoping everyone else will do the adapting. We touched upon that before, but this asymmetry rarely ends well. I mean, mature communication begins at the point where you stop asking whether you are allowed to adapt and start asking whether you are willing to. It is the moment that recognize that your way of functioning is not neutral, is not universal or self-evident. This is not a call to suppress yourself. It's a call to expand yourself. A person with only one behavioral gear is not authentic. They are limited. A person with access to several gears who can choose between them without losing their sense of self is not fake. That's competence. And competence in human interaction matters more than self-expression. Once this is understood, the conversation changes. You stop defending your habits, you start examining their effects. You stop saying, this is just how I am, and you start asking a more difficult question. Is this really working right now for me in this situation? That question can be uncomfortable because it implies responsibility. But it is also liberating because the moment behavior becomes something you can choose rather than something you must protect, growth becomes possible. And growth in this context doesn't mean becoming someone else. No, it means becoming more than just one thing. And that's good. That's really, really good. The strange need to simplify, right? I mean, at this point, many people begin to feel uneasy. If adaptation matters, if people are genuinely different in how they perceive and react, then a new risk appears all of a sudden: oversimplification, categorizing, reducing people to types, putting people in boxes. And we are taught very early on that this is something we should not do. Do not label people. Everyone is unique. You shouldn't put people in boxes. Well, maybe. All of this sounds wise. It is also in practice largely ignored by everybody because the truth is uncomfortable but undeniable. We label each other constantly. We do it automatically and we do it quickly, and we do it whether we approve of it or not. Age, profession, clothing, posture, vocabulary, accent, facial expression, skin color, education, religion, choices of food. Within seconds, our minds are already forming expectations. This is not a moral failure, it is a cognitive necessity. It is how the human brain is wired. Without some form of categorization, social life would be entirely unmanageable. We would have to approach every interaction as if we are entirely new with no reference points at all. That level of openness may sound virtuous, but it would be absolutely paralyzing. Our brains are built to look for patterns because patterns reduce uncertainty, and uncertainty equals danger. So the problem is not that we categorize, the problem is how we do it, why we do it, and what we do next. Most everyday labels are lazy. Difficult, stupid, lazy, weird. These labels feel satisfying because they end the thinking process. I don't have to use my brain anymore on this. Once someone is labeled, curiosity dies. Responsibility disappears. The story becomes simple. The problem is them. Those people and those people. All of them. But simple stories are rarely accurate, and inaccurate stories create bad decisions. There's also a quiet irony here. People who object most strongly to labels often have no problem using them as long as the labels feel justified. They resist being categorized themselves, but generously categorize others. They oppose boxes in theory while using them constantly in practice. This contradiction isn't hypocrisy. Well, some of it are perhaps, but it is mostly discomfort because we sense that labels are powerful. And power can be misused. Used carelessly, labels flatten people. They turn complexity into caricature. They excess contempt. They allow us to stop listening. In the worst cases, they become moral weapons rather than cognitive tools, really. But rejecting all labels does not make us more understanding. Rather, it makes us blind. I mean, the alternative to bad categorization is not no categorization. It is a better categorization. This distinction matters because there is a world of difference between labeling someone in order to dismiss them and describing patterns in order to understand. One closes doors, the other opens the doors. When you call someone annoying, you learn nothing. When you notice that someone needs more time, more reassurance, or more structure than you do, you gain information. When you describe behavior instead of attacking character, your ability to adapt improves immediately. And this is where most of a stumble. We confuse observation with judgment. We assume that noticing patterns means freezing people in place. It doesn't. Patterns are tendencies, not prisons. We have to separate these things. In fact, refusing to acknowledge patterns, well, it often leads to harsher judgment later on. If you expect everyone to function like you, and surprise, surprise, they don't, frustration builds, which then leaks out as irritation, contempt, or withdrawal completely. Ironically, the refusal to categorize can make you less tolerant, not more. There's another reason we cling to labels, by the way, even when we know better, because labels protect us from uncertainty. If we can explain someone's behavioral ideas quickly, we don't have to sit with not knowing. We don't have to ask questions. We don't have to adapt. We can simply decide who they are and, move on. But understanding human behavior requires tolerating ambiguity. It requires holding two ideas at the same time. That people show patterns and that they can surprise you at the same time. That behavior is often predictable and yet never fully so. It's a conundrum. Humans are complex. This tension is a bit uncomfortable, I know. It is also unavoidable. The key question then is not whether we should categorize people, but for what purpose we should do it. Are we categorizing in order to protect our ego or in order to improve our interaction? Are we labeling to excuse disengagement or to, enable adjustment? When categorization is used as a shortcut to superiority, it corrodes relationships. When it is used as a tool for navigation, it reduces friction. The same act, noticing patterns, can either narrow your understanding or expand your understanding, depending on what you do with it. This is why any framework for understanding behavior carries risk. In the wrong hands, it becomes, an excuse. In the right hands, it becomes more of a compass, really. This is where the gearbox metaphor becomes useful again. No one drives with just one single gear and calls it freedom. A gearbox does not limit the car, it enables it. The more gears you have access to, the more precisely you can respond to different conditions. Starting, climbing, overtaking, cruising, each requires something different. Human behavior works about the same way. People are not one thing. No, they are collections of preferred gears. Some gears feel natural and are used often. Others are available but require effort. Some are rarely used at all because problems do not arise because someone has the wrong gear, but because they insist on using the same one regardless of the conditions. Once you start seeing behavior this way, labels lose their sting. They stop being verdicts and start being descriptions instead. Temporary, contextual, revisable. Useful only insofar as they help you choose your own response. This perspective also protects you from a very common trap, mistaking behavior for identity. People behave differently under pressure, fatigue, stress, safety, threat, happiness, sadness. A single reaction rarely tells the whole story. We have good days, we have bad days. Patterns emerge over time, not in isolated moments, I would say. And yet patterns do emerge. Yes, ignoring those patterns does not make you open-minded, it makes you naive, really. So the challenge is this: can you observe without condemning? Can you describe without reducing? Can you use patterns as guides rather than weapons? Because if you can, something interesting happens. The world becomes less personal, less insulting, less exhausting. You stop taking every reaction as a statement about you and start seeing it as an expression of how the other person is wired. That doesn't excuse bad behavior, no, but it does explain a great deal of unnecessary conflict. An explanation, when used correctly, is not an excuse. It's a starting point, which leads us to the next issue, one that people often hide behind once patterns become visible, the oh-so-comforting phrase, "This is just how I am." Once we accept that people rely on preferred gears, a tempting conclusion often follows. Well, that explains it. That's just how they are. It sounds tolerant, it sounds enlightened, it also quietly liberates everyone of responsibility. This is where many frameworks fail, not because they are wrong, but because they are misused, frankly. Understanding behavior is not the same thing as excusing it. Explaining why someone acts a certain way doesn't mean that every action is acceptable, inevitable, or beyond influence. No, it simply means that behavior follows patterns, and patterns can be worked with. I mean, even if someone gets so mad and smashed his fist through the window of the neighbor's car, your car maybe, you wouldn't, even if you totally understand why he did it, you wouldn't say it was okay now, would you? No. You would condemn it. I mean, human behavior is remarkably consistent under similar conditions. Put the same person under similar pressure, and you will often see similar reactions. That consistency is what makes behavior understandable, but consistency is not the same thing as inflexibility. People are not locked into one way of functioning. They are inclined towards certain responses, not condemned to them. This distinction matters actually, because without it, self-knowledge becomes self-indulgence. I'm just blunt. I'm just emotional. I'm just analytical. I'm just spontaneous. And these statements are often presented as explanations, but they are usually boundaries drawn around effort. They describe comfort zones, not limitations, and when they are treated as immutable truths, they quietly freeze development. The uncomfortable reality is this: most people can adapt far more than they choose to do. They adapt when something truly matters. They adapt when they feel safe enough, or threatened enough, or motivated enough, or scared enough. The problem is not inability, it is selectivity. That's why the phrase, "this is just how I am," deserves some serious scrutiny. Sometimes it is honest, often it is a defense. It signals a desire to be understood without being challenged, accepted without being questioned, left alone without being accountable. Sure, but behavior is not identity. You are not your reflexes. You are not your first reaction. You are not even your strongest tendencies. You are the person who can notice them and decide what to do next. And this is where responsibility re-enters the picture. Not as blame, again, but as agency. Responsibility in behavior doesn't mean suppressing who you are. It means recognizing that every behavioral style has strengths and costs. The same trait that makes you effective in one context can make you destructive in another. Sometimes the highest gear is good, sometimes it's useless. Directness can save time and destroy trust. Caution can protect relationships and stall decisions. Energy can inspire, it can also overwhelm. Precision can clarify, and it can intimidate. No gear is wrong, no gear works everywhere. So maturity then is not about finding the right gear. It's about learning when to shift gear. This is also where many people misunderstand predictability. Behavior is predictable, but not in a mechanical sense. It is predictable in patterns, not in outcomes maybe. You cannot forecast every reaction, but you can anticipate the tendencies. And anticipation allows for adjustment before friction occurs. Good news, frankly. This is why self-awareness alone is insufficient. Knowing your own style is very, very useful, but only halfway. The real leverage comes from understanding how your style affects others and how theirs affects you, how we affect each other. Without that, self-awareness becomes narcissistic, really. With it, it becomes relational. There's another comforting illusion worth dismantling here also, the idea that adaptability somehow makes you less authentic. In reality, inflexibility is what reduces you. If you only ever operate in one gear, you are not being authentic, you are limiting yourself. Don't do it. Authenticity is not about consistency across situations. It is about alignment between intention, behavior, context. A skilled musician does not play every piece at the same volume, at the same tempo, with the same intensity, and call it honesty. They adjust not to deceive, but to serve the music. I mean, communication must work the same way, which brings us to an important but often overlooked fact. Behaviors can be observed. You don't need to become an amateur psychologist to notice how people react, what energizes them, what shuts them down, what makes them defensive, and what makes them engage. These signals are available to anyone who is willing to pay attention. The difficulty is not complexity, it is rather humility. To observe behavior accurately, you must accept that your first interpretation might be wrong, that your irritation might say more about you than about the other person, frankly, that your preferred way of functioning is not the universal standard. Maybe it isn't. Once that acceptance is in place, something shifts. You stop moralizing about behavior and start working with it. You stop asking who is right and who is wrong, and you start asking what works. You stop treating differences as obstacles and begin to see it as variables more. and variables can be managed. At this point, the question becomes unavoidable. If behavior follows patterns, if it is observable, changeable and situational, then what exactly can we rely on? What principles hold even when people differ? And this is where we need to be precise. Not optimistic, not vague, precise. Which is why before we move toward any conclusion, we need to clarify what behavior actually is and what it isn't. Once responsibility enters the picture, many people begin searching for certainty. If behavior follows patterns, if it can be observed and influenced, then surely there must be a system, something solid, something complete, something reliable, a way to finally get people right. This is where expectations quietly drift into total fantasy, because there is no system that fully explains human behaviors. There never will be. No book, no model, no framework will ever fully explain a human being. People are not spreadsheets. Sorry. Not because we haven't tried hard enough, because we have, but because the object itself resists completion. Human beings are not closed systems. They change with age, with context, fatigue, stress, power, safety, culture, and experiences, and everything else. Every framework that claims to capture all of that is not ambitious, it is just dishonest. This does not make behavioral understanding pointless. Let me point that out. The mistake many people make is to treat behavioral models as verdicts instead of lenses. They want final answers when what they are being offered are working hypotheses. They want certainty when what it is available is probabilities. When those expectations are disappointed, they swing to the opposite extreme and reject frameworks altogether. You can't put people in boxes, it's useless. Colors, letters, words, doesn't matter. And both positions completely miss the point. Behavior is not something that you solve, it is something that you navigate. There are a few principles that hold, even in the absence of total certainty. They are not comforting, but they are reliable. First, behavior is observable. You do not need access to someone's inner life to notice how they act, react, decide, hesitate, or withdraw. You can observe pace, intensity, consistency, openness, defensiveness. These signals are not hidden. They are simply ignored when we are too busy defending our own perspective. Secondly, behavior is patterned. People do not react randomly. Over time, tendencies emerge. Under pressure, many people become more like themselves, not less. Patterns become clearer, not fuzzier. This is why long-term relationships feel predictable, for better and for worse. Number 3, behavior is situational. The same person will obviously behave differently depending on the context. What do you know? Power, risk, time, pressure, and perceived safety, it all matters. A behavior that looks like confidence in one setting may look like aggression in another. A behavior that looks like caution in one setting may look like avoidance in another. Context does, of course, not excuse behaviors, but it explains the variation. Number 4, behavior is changeable within certain limits. Sure, I mean, people can adapt, they can learn, they can stretch, but they do not become someone else overnight. Expecting instant transformation is quite unrealistic. Expecting some adjustment, sure, over time, isn't. And finally, behavior is never the whole person. Reducing someone to how they behave in a single moment is horrible, horrible, horrible mistake. This is where many conflicts quietly go wrong. We treat behavior as identity. We say, you are disrespectful, instead of, what you just said there came across as quite dismissive. We say, oh, she's so cold, instead of, she values distance and precision. Once behavior hardens into character judgment, dialogue stops. Good behavioral understanding does the opposite, I think. It softens certainty, it replaces accusation with description. It makes room for adjustment without demanding reinvention. There is another misconception worth addressing here, I think, because it hides between sophistication. Some people assume that if behavior is explainable, then everything must be tolerated. Not true. Not true at all. Understanding why someone behaves a certain way does not obligate you to accept every behavior. I said it before, I'm going to say it again. Boundary still matters. Consequences still matter. Accountability still matters, of course. But accountability without understanding tends to become punitive. Understanding without accountability becomes permissive. Neither leads to healthy relationships. No, the balance lies in recognizing patterns and responding appropriately. This is also where humility becomes non-negotiable. No matter how you experienced you are really, no matter how many models you know, your understanding will always be partial. You will misread situations, you will project, you will sometimes adapt when you shouldn't, and sometimes hold your ground when adjustment would have helped quite a lot. That is not failure, it's precipitation. I've done this for more than 30 years. I still make a lot of mistakes. What matters is not perfect accuracy, but ongoing calibration. Paying attention, updating assumptions, noticing when some approach keeps producing the same friction, and having the courage to change it, of course. At this stage, many people feel both relieved but also unsettled. Relieved because they no longer need to fix everyone. Unsettled because they can no longer hide behind simple stories. I mean, if behavior is observable but not absolute, pattern but not fixed, changeable but not infinite, then the task is not control, it is alignment. And alignment begins with one final shift, perhaps the most difficult of them all, moving from judging behavior to working with it. This is where everything we have discussed either becomes practical or remains theoretical. By now, something should be very clear. Most communication doesn't fail because people are malicious, careless, or unintelligent, stupid. It fails because we overestimate the power of our intentions and underestimate the influence of our behavioral patterns. We speak as if meaning travels intact, and we are surprised when it doesn't. We repeat ourselves, we defend ourselves, and eventually we label others when the problem was never clarity alone. The uncomfortable truth is this. You are not misunderstood because you are unique. You are misunderstood because you are human. Whoa! Every person you meet carries an internal system for interpreting the world. And that system was shaped long before you arrived in their life, and it will not reorganize itself simply because you explain yourself well. Your words enter that system, and they are translated sometimes accurately, sometimes not. What follows is not a disagreement or an agreement, but it's a reaction. Once you see this, the idea of winning a conversation starts to feel strangely childish, don't you think? I mean, winning presupposes that there is a single correct interpretation waiting to be discovered. In human interaction, there rarely is. There are only perspectives that either collide or align. This is where responsibility becomes quite unglamorous and deeply personal. You cannot control how others think. You cannot rewrite their history. You cannot prevent every misunderstanding. Sorry, no can do. But you can notice patterns in them, and you can notice patterns in yourself. You can observe which behaviors create safety and which provoke resistance. You can choose whether to insist on being expressed or aim to be understood. And that choice matters more than most people realize, not because it makes you morally superior, but because it determines the quality of your relationships. It shapes whether conversations move forward or stall, whether disagreements become destructive or productive, whether people lean in or quietly withdraw. At some point, most of us have to confront the sobering possibility that we have been repeating the same communicative habits for years or decades even, expecting different outcomes. That we have been loyal to a style that feels honest to us, while ignoring the effect it has on everybody else. That we have mistaken consistency for integrity. The world does not ask you to abandon who you are, no, but it does ask you to grow beyond the idea that who you are is complete. Maturity in communication is not just about mastery, it is about responsibility without drama, really, about making small, deliberate adjustments, not because you're wrong, but because reality is complex, about understanding that adaptation is not a betrayal of you, but an expansion of it. There's no final system waiting at the end of this, no watertight model, no moment where you finally get people and all misunderstandings mysteriously disappear. No. Anyone promising that is selling comfort instead of truth. What there is instead is an ongoing practice practice of paying attention. And it is fascinating of noticing when your words consistently land badly, or recognizing when your favorite gear no longer fits the terrain, or resisting the urge to defend intention when impact is asking for care. Perhaps most importantly, this is a practice of humility, I would say. Once you accept that we are all the idiot in someone else's story, something softens. You stop taking offense quite so quickly. You stop demanding perfect understanding and start working toward a workable alignment, let's call it. That doesn't make communication easy, but it makes it real. And real communication, flawed, effortful, incomplete, is still infinitely better than the comforting illusion that if you explain yourself just one more time, everything will finally make sense. It won't, but you might. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends and family. If you would consider subscribing to this channel, I would appreciate it more than you might think. Thank you for watching.